It happened. What everybody has been anticipating, the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates just went underway, where Jerome Powell just had the second cut of the year. So you got to be asking yourself, when moon, right? Well, wrong. I'm going to here to tell you the contrarian view, the opposite view, where I think that the interest rates and the cuts do not matter at all for this Bitcoin bull run, and that this Bitcoin bull run is actually has multiple other catalysts that will send it skyrocketing in flight. So whether the Fed cuts interest rates or not does not matter. Now, before we get into that, let's review some of what happened with yesterday with Jerome Powell cutting interest rates, where we had a literally 10-2 vote where they voted to cut interest rates by 25 basis points. And here's the truth, folks, is that the market has already priced in multiple rate cuts this year. They've priced in at least 3. And so we saw one last week, or last month, excuse me, and then we saw one this month. And we could potentially see one in December, but Jerome Powell was very shaky with the way he was describing how the interest rate cuts could happen. And he also came out and said that it's not baked in. It's not a for sure thing that they're going to cut interest rates in December. And as I said in the beginning, I don't think that matters for the Bitcoin bull run. And here's why. Because everybody else around the globe has been cutting interest rates. And as you guys know, the global M2 money supply continues on growing. And even though the Fed is not cutting interest rates, everybody else around the globe is. Canada did, the UK, all of these others have had multiple rate cuts. So as long as everybody else is keeping this train pumping, well, that liquidity is going to be dumped into the most liquid asset in the planet, and other things such as the stock market and the tech sector, the real winners. That's where people are going to put their liquidity. And let's be honest, outside of Bitcoin, there's maybe 5 to 7 companies that have really performed well this year. So putting liquidity into 5 to 7 companies, they would need a little bit more diversification, or at least that's what, the traditional hedge fund managers say. And so if you look at the way that Bitcoin has been priced and the global M2 money supply, well, that keeps increasing. But that is just one factor. I have way more that I believe that Powell's saying all of these things, saying that, the data is suggesting that the outlook hasn't changed. Shutdowns will temporarily weigh on economic activity. Another cut in December is far from assured. Today's cut was risk management. He could imagine the lack of data will, affect this December decision. So they may pause, right? Well, the reality is that you really step back and take a look at the institutional and all of the other demand that we are seeing, right? Institutions have bought nearly 1 million Bitcoin in the year 2025 of our Lord alone, right? This is 7 times the overall year's mining issuance. And so the reality is that the whales have been selling off here to kind of feed this, and we still have been keeping that level above 100,000. We reached above 100,000 before the halving for the first time in Bitcoin's history, except for maybe the early days. And we keep pushing and floating around that all-time high, even though we see massive amounts of selling, even though we see a lot of market uncertainty. There's a lot of potential negative factors that we see here, yet Bitcoin is still floating and doing its thing. So the demand to buy Bitcoin is increasing. And it's all taken off exchanges very quickly. 613,000 Bitcoin vanished from Binance that quickly. And so look, you guys know that I'm a huge bull on this channel, and I've been screaming about the potential of a supply shock. This isn't a headline that I wrote, folks. You guys can't plan. I can't plan this out better, right? But look at this, right? Binance reserves hit yearly lows here as it drops sharply. I mean, look at this thing. So either Binance is selling a bunch, or traders are moving coins off of exchanges, tightening that supply very, very quickly. And Bitcoin is starting to take its way and go into other asset classes very quickly. I mean, we're having Saylor put on essentially a masterclass of how Bitcoin can start to absorb a lot of these other markets. Now, we've gotten it with Strife and Stride coming in, and we've got Strike and MSTR essentially taking over the equity markets. And MSTR will now have another vote on whether or not to get into the S&P 500 here in December. So in just over a month, we're going to have two decisions that could affect the Bitcoin price. One of which being whether or not the S&P 500 includes MSTR, which would get a lot of passive inflows, which would then let the biggest Bitcoin holder that holds over 600,000 Bitcoin today get access to more capital to buy more Bitcoin and come up with more vehicles like we're seeing here on the screen. Or we will have another interest rate cut where this interest rate cut, okay, sure, it's already priced in. But even if the Fed does not cut interest rates, what happens normally, right? Before the Fed, or when the Fed doesn't cut interest rates and there's worried about the dollar, well, people flock into gold. And what have we been seeing here lately is that these industries or these people have been flocking into Bitcoin similar to the way that they've been flocking into gold. And now gold has been having one of the best years of all time. So I don't want to take anything away from that, but people have been really worried about the inflationary aspects of what we're seeing in today's economy. The PCE is still floating around 3, CPI, PPI, all of these other metrics that show the overall inflation, they're still floating around that 3% mark. And so as these industries such as real estate, and these money market funds, all of these are now, originally Bitcoiners were saying, oh, Bitcoin will take over the gold market. That's a $22 trillion market. Well, I think this is where we're starting to see the interesting aspect of how Bitcoin will revolutionize all of finance. Of course, we initially saw everything be financialized, right? We saw real estate be financialized in 2008, and we see what happens there. We've seen the bond markets, of course, been financialized. We've seen money market funds, equities, all of these things, companies be financialized by Wall Street. And quite frankly, every time something gets financialized, it goes to shit. Pardon my French. But when they get Bitcoinized, this is where you encourage a very unique aspect of Bitcoin because you have hard money. So now you have to play the cost benefit analysis. If I were to sell Bitcoin to buy this camera that I'm coming to you guys live from, would that camera help me make more money than, say, that Bitcoin over time, right? Or would this change my lifestyle enough where I could come to you guys live from Athens, Greece here and record these things, right? You have to, every company has to play this cost benefit analysis with all of these things. And because they're doing that and looking at, okay, I need to be more cautious with Bitcoin, they're not going to be throwing darts at the wall like you're seeing a lot of these other companies do, right? I mean, Amazon didn't make money for the longest time until they invented AWS. Many people know the Amazon story where Jeff Bezos started this whole thing in his mom's garage and was selling books. And, it wasn't extremely profitable until they realized, oh, we need a lot of web servers. So we're going to create Amazon Web Services. Same thing with Uber. Uber right now isn't profitable, but investors and VCs are banking on that. Uber's going to be collecting so much data of where people drive that they're going to have the first automated car system and all this and that, right? Same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now going to be taking over all of these financial markets that we've seen, right? And now we're seeing the guys that initially hated skeptical, honestly, now go all in, including the banking services. Now, listen into what Jamie Dimon, potentially the biggest Bitcoin bear we've ever had, come in and say about Bitcoin.
Well, crypto at one point, he was still skeptical.
I've gotten away with no damage so far.
crypto is real. If you mean blockchain, stable coins, you have a JP Morgan deposit coin, you can move stuff, smart contracts are real, all that stuff is real. It will be used by all of us to facilitate, better transactions and customer service.
If anybody was skeptical of
So
crypto
he
at one
said all
point,
this, and look at who's in the background here. They're obviously doing this from the UAE or Saudi Arabia, who is potentially buying Bitcoin, and it's been hinted at that they've been buying Bitcoin through all of this. So it's interesting when you really take a step back and look at these banks now say, hey, we are going to be using Bitcoin. All of these things are really real and tangible. Look, they're going through that whole Bitcoin phase, right? We're seeing Jamie Dimon, Larry Fink, all of these guys. Larry Fink, I think, gets it because this is why they're pushing the ETF products, these ETN products all over the place. This is why they are trying to get as many people on board as possible, just buying in the ETF. But Jamie Dimon, on the other hand, he's saying blockchain, he's saying transactions. They've got JPM coin. They've got all of these other things that they're trying to build out right now. But they're not embracing Bitcoin just yet. Of course, they're letting you borrow against your ETFs. They're letting a few things kind of come into the financialized world here. But either way, this adoption cycle that we're seeing is absolutely massive. And I highlighted it to you guys here earlier. We saw a ton of coins get scooped up off of Binance, and we still have 2.14 million Bitcoin left on exchanges today, right? And this number could change rapidly as we see this 613,000 really get, taken away here recently. So as we continue to monitor how much Bitcoin is left on exchanges, you got to ask yourself, okay, there's a lot of Bitcoin left on exchanges, still relative. It's been floating around that 2 million. But what about these OTC desks, right? I like to talk about these OTC desks because these are where the big players are coming from, right? Jamie Dimon and these guys, they aren't going to Coinbase and just entering in their JP Morgan email and buying a Bitcoin, right? These guys are getting the white glove premium service from all of these OTC desks. And in the past 5 months, they've seen a rise over 200,000 Bitcoin, one of the highest levels recorded in recent years. And Bitcoin was at near a record high. So everybody was dumping. The whales, they got connected with all of this. They see Bitcoin rising up. They wanted to get a little bit of that profit, right? There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. But I think it is interesting, the transition, so to speak, that we're starting to see, right? So Trump is always going to say, oh, we need to push you guys to buy this dip. And make sure you guys are hitting that like button for me. I think this one might be getting a little shadow banned here. So make sure you guys are hitting that like and hitting the subscribe button for me if you're not already subscribed. Because these OTC desks, right, they're starting to FOMO their way in, right? They're getting a lot of Bitcoin and obtaining a lot of Bitcoin here today. And they're doing this because big players are getting ready to buy and make big buys, right? But you don't need to buy a shit ton of Bitcoin in order to unlock your purchasing power. This is why I've partnered over with my friends at Salt. You could go to saltlending.com/green-candle today. They offer some of the best rates in the industry, starting at 8.95% with a 12-month duration, and you can borrow up to 70% LTV. You got to go to this website, though, because they're giving Green Candle listeners a special exclusive offer. So if you go there today, you click this special offer, you can get something that nobody else on the public has available to them. They're giving it specifically for Green Candle listeners. And you guys got to do it quick because even though Bitcoin is crashing, allegedly crashing to 107,000, we were talking about this earlier. The top 100 publicly traded companies now have over 1 billion Bitcoin, right? And they keep on buying. Look, in the past 30 days, there's been 11 new entities. There's 207,000 Bitcoin, or 207, publicly traded companies, right? They have over 1 million Bitcoin. These ETFs have 1.5 million Bitcoin. So institutional players combined have over 4 million. And then we see, governments like the United States get this hockey stick and get 326,000 to Bitcoin because they're just seizing it, right? So they're seeing the true value proposition of Bitcoin here. And so the moral of the story is that no matter what the Federal Reserve does and dumps quote unquote more liquidity into the market, the fundamentals of Bitcoin do not lie. This is the only scarce asset to ever exist in human history. Sure, you could say that about gold. You could say that about some of these others, but it's not easily verifiable and divisible like Bitcoin. And with gold, right, we had rumors that Elon Musk would be mining gold off of asteroids. They could always create more gold in a lab, but nobody could ever create more Bitcoin. And that's why I truly believe the fundamentals of this supply shock are coming, and they are going to be greatly more advantageous for our pockets and our Bitcoin bag than the Fed's decision could ever be. The Fed could keep rates exactly where they are, and I still think that this thesis holds, and I think that this thesis would take off. I'm extremely bullish on what we have going forward and the amount of demand that we are seeing. I mean, the institutions have already bought up the total amount of supply. So if the institutions were to stop buying for the last 2 months of the year, they say, hey, it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, we don't want to buy anymore. I find that very unlikely, to be honest. But if they were to stop doing that, stop the buys, they've already bought up the entire supply of what Bitcoin, or the total amount that will be mined this year in the year 2025. So I agree with Juan, what he's saying here, but before dusk is when it gets extremely dark. Bitcoin's a marathon, not a race. We'll get up there. And I agree. I think that at the end of the day, you got to take a step back and really look at how Bitcoin is reacting in this type of market. And I think it's reacting extremely positively, right? I think that there is no doubt in my mind that we're going to see Bitcoin absolutely rip and roar here very soon. And I think the fundamentals of what we're seeing, I don't think the human mind can honestly grasp the amount of scarcity that Bitcoin holds. Now, I'm going to keep this one short and sweet, so make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button, hitting the like button for me. Send this one to the stratosphere because everybody's just saying, hey, Bitcoin should moon when interest rates are cut. I don't think that's the case. I think we're going to moon anyway. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.